Hi everyone! If this is your first time attending a webinar with RankSense, welcome. If it's not your first time, then welcome back. Today we're joined by Greg Bernhardt from RocketClicks, and he's going to demonstrate some data blending techniques he uses with Python. Hi Greg, how are you?
Doing awesome, thank you.
Yeah, hey, Greg, thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited. We're getting more guests, more marketers that are taming the snake, right? So getting past the technophobia. So I'm really excited to have you here. You've been rocking it really hard with a lot of useful articles I've seen in Portstam. I always see something new coming up from you on LinkedIn. So that's incredibly exciting to see that. And it's exciting because, last year when I started this crazy crusade, as I call it, right, I didn't think, anybody will even listen. Right? Now we're having, the bandwagon full of people that are really excited and pushing a lot of really exciting stuff. This is amazing. So welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Really an honor. Obviously, you're a big part of my story as well as being an influencer and getting me off on a good start. So awesome to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, so the framework that we want to use is we're going to spend about half of the time just learning a little bit about your story. I love that because I come from an engineering background. I learned programming formally, but a lot of you guys are, just, learning right now. You have your needs that you're trying to, and you feel like this is a good solution for the current needs. So tell me a bit about your background, a bit of your journey, what your role is at RocketClicks, and why you got this, Python bug, that bite of the snake, and what have you done with it, right? How is that impacting your work, and what are the main challenges that you face, and how you overcome them, right?
Yes, so a lot of really great questions in there, and I do hope that I can be a source of some mystery clearing and some inspiration for marketers out there that, either they're on the fence to use Python or something like it, or they've just started, or maybe they're learning about it for the very first time, because I very much consider myself a beginner. I'm in no terms on Hamlet's pedestal, even close. So hopefully I can come from the angle where people can relate to my story, because I think I'm still kind of living that if segment out a development into 4 quadrants of expertise. I still feel like I'm in that first quadrant. So I'm right there with you for those people still learning or deciding to learn.
I can tell you that I feel the same way. For me, is every day is always learning something new. The more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know, right? So we're all in the same first quadrant.
That's one of my favorite quotes. I don't, it was like Richard Feynman or someone came up with that, and it is so true. It's humbling, right?
Yeah.
That it just trees out. When you learn one thing, there's 3 more things available to you. There's more doors to open. But that should never be a source of frustration. It should be one of curiosity and excitement to see what that next door holds for you, because it's what it is. It's possibility, and that's always exciting. So yeah, to give a little background on myself, how far back we go, but pretty much with SEO, it kind of starts with 2001. And I started a physics community called physicsforums.com, which I still manage today. But the important part of that story is that I very quickly realized how important ranking organically in Google was to the growth of my community. There was that clear relationship of, if you wanted the community to grow, well, you better rank well, because Google, for the most part, was their search engines in general, were the faucet for new membership, right? So you're not doing well in Google, your memberships down in the community. If you're doing well, membership is rising. So I understood that connection very early on. And through that time period from 2001 to now, I also got a degree in information studies from UW Milwaukee. That was at the time, it was early 2000s. I was very much a transition from the traditional library sciences. So on one hand, I was learning about Dewey Decimal, and the other hand, I was learning about databases or digital databases. So it was a really odd time, but it was interesting to see that transition happening. And besides,
sorry to interrupt, and you think that physics, that training shaped some of your mindset? Because I remember in college, physics was my favorite topic, and it's and I got the first principle thinking from my time in school learning physics. Do you feel like that shaped a little bit your mindset?
So embarrassing story. The reason I started physics forums was back in high school. I was taking a physics class and I wasn't doing so well. And at the time I was interested in community management and some design and development. And I pitched my teacher, if I created, a nice science community, would you give me a couple points extra credit? And it actually worked. I ended up passing that class and it turned out to be, sort of a career path for me. So do I know a whole lot of physics? A little bit through osmosis and high level stuff. I love pop science, pop physics, but could I tell you, the equations of relativity? No, I couldn't, but I'm still very much interested in it. And certainly, we've got people working in that community that have the expertise, but embarrassingly, I don't have it. I'm more of, the management level of that community. So, yeah. And so between kind of 2001 and now, I went through all kinds of different things. I was involved in website flipping for a long time, and that kind of fizzled out. Did some e-commerce stuff with selling scripts. You name it. I always kind of thought of myself as an internet hustler a little bit, finding the areas that were interesting and working in it. But a lot changed this year in January, where I made a move to my current employer, RocketClicks, right now, and one of their core values is self-initiation, self-starting, always learning, growing, reaching, and they really mean that. And I took that to heart when I got hired. And so I believe my path, my journey with Python started in February of this year.
Wow.
There was an article, I was trying to look for it. It was either in Search Engine Land or Search Engine Journal. I can't find it, but I know it exists or had existed, where there was a writer that was showing how to use Python to analyze like a screaming frog crawl. I don't know if that rings a bell. I think it was a pretty big article back at the turn of the year.
Yeah, but I don't think it was in one of the main.
It was somewhere
I
else.
remember that one, because I tweeted it, but it was in one blog. Yeah, that's awesome.
That captured my.
But before you say that, right? But do you have code writing experience before you did that? In what language?
Nothing officially, educationally, or professionally. I was always messing around a little bit. Hacking with spaghetti code with JavaScript or PHP, that kind of stuff. So I mean, I understood at a beginning level for all those technologies, but for the most part, nothing advanced or commercial by any means or professional by any means. So
that's awesome.
Before Python, I had a decent handle conceptually how programming languages functionality worked, but certainly nothing, personally that I put on a resume for the most part. So
then tell me about that screaming frog automation with Python.
Yeah, it was, it took a screaming frog crawl CSV, I believe, and it broke it down, showing how you could better visualize, like status codes, maybe some canonicalization issues, a lot of visualization stuff. And I just remember looking at it just wide-eyed, and I didn't know how to start, but I knew I needed to because yeah, the curiosity, it hooked me. The possibilities just go, just go crazy in your mind. Because you can
But what was it? But what was it? Was it that you just wanted to play and geek out with it, or you felt like, oh, this is a better way of doing something that I'm already doing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just extending what you're doing or making what you're doing more efficient. And we can talk about that more at length, that the benefits for SEOs and marketers to use Python. But a lot of times it comes down to a lot of breaking out data from GUI or graphical user interfaces that developers build, that they're like walled gardens. If you look at it within, like, say, take your Screaming Frog crawl and you look at it within Screaming Frog, well, you're visualizing that from a developer standpoint, what they thought was interesting to you, could be interesting to you. Now you say, okay, you export that to CSV. Well, what are you going to look at it with CSV? It's Excel. So now you're again being pushed into into an interface that a developer thought would be useful to you, but maybe it's not, or maybe it doesn't have the capabilities that you want or the visualizations that you want. And that's where Python comes into play, where you can get granular, you can customize to your heart's content at levels that these platforms or apps couldn't ever give you.
That's awesome. That's great. So then, so you saw that. So how do you take that plunge into, actually doing the code modifications, right? That we're going to see shortly, right? And what kind of resources that you recommend to attendees now that they could, if they're, I can assume that some people here are feeling, relating to that. They're seeing all this Python, everybody's sharing theirs, but where do I even get started, right? It looks like an intimidating monster, right? What do I even piece it out so I can start enjoying these benefits because that's kind of like a short time. You start in February, right? Now you're sharing code that you're doing, and I see more and more people, and we have a pipeline of webinars we're excited about to share more guests.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still feel like a lot of those beginning questions, those existential questions, are still close to my heart, and I still feel them from time to time, certainly at different aspects. But I think the first question is where to start. Because you can see something that's really interesting that someone made, and one of the big hairy questions is, where do I even begin? This looks like I don't even know what to do here. Where do I go? And I think some of that is built out of maybe a stigma of classical or like earlier generational programming languages like C++ and Java, where they have frustrating sometimes and complex environments that you need to set up, and their interpreters are funky, and how do you even set up your environment? What do you use? What do you write with? All these questions go past your mind. And what was so attractive to Python for me was really how easy it is to just get started. With the language itself being very clean, very concise. There's not a whole lot of extra syntax or characters that you need to use. It kind of flows very well. But also the access of excuse me, the environment that you can use. There's no demand necessarily initially for some complex Linux setup or Windows setup. We're going to be going through this tutorial of Google Colab, and bless their hearts, I don't know. You can tell me, when did Google Colab get introduced? Do you know?
Yeah, it was probably like 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
2-3 years ago. It's fantastic. Maybe the competitor Jupyter Notebooks maybe was a little earlier.
No, yeah, Jupyter Notebooks probably over 10 years or more.
Yeah. Wow. So that environment is just, for lack of a better phrase, just plug and play, or load and play, right? You don't have to set anything up. They do all that heavy.
Yeah, but do you take any training? Do you have any mentorship? Or do you join any community forums or paid, how do you get your, or do you just read articles and tutorials and got your way
Yeah,
through that?
so the real starting point would be, I say, your kind of tutorials that you post and other people post, on SEJ and SEL, that kind of stuff was really the start, the
Wow.
Kickstarter. Then you move into, there's plenty of free tutorials out there, or, like code academies and stuff like that, to kind of get you started, or setting up that learning process for the
Do
basics.
you have one specifically? Do you have one specifically that you recommend, like Slow
I
Learn,
have used Code
something that you
Academy,
try to?
and I think that was actually recommended in one of the articles I read. Some lady talking about her path on data science, and she
Yeah,
talked
bro.
about how,
Probably Brittany or
yeah, there's a course actually on using Python for data science, and obviously
Mhm.
it's very much a starting point, but it was really useful starting point.
That's awesome. That's really amazing. And
And
would you, and how long did it take you to become proficient on it?
ooh, proficient, I wouldn't even say I'm proficient, right? So
I
not
mean, at least to be able to put something that will work, that you say, hey, I was able to modify
Yeah.
this and
So,
right.
a silver lining with the whole COVID thing, unfortunately, but it did give me some quarantine time where, I wasn't spending time with friends. I wasn't doing all those things we normally do. So I spent that time, usually it was April and May, really hard, and dove into it every day. Um, and it's something that, like learning any other language, you need to be touching it, ideally every day in some capacity. You don't need to be doing full, hour or 2 hour lessons every day, but you do need to be reading about it, having it front and center in your mind, always having that kind of exposure, and it'll just kind of build on itself. um,
Yeah, I like to compare it to riding a bike. I said, look, it's about building, the muscle memory of in with practice,
it
right? With
absolutely
practice.
is.
And
Because you
one
think,
thing, yeah, one thing that I want to mention that I put on a thread, and Will Reynolds highlighted it, that I posted it last year, is find some problem that you're very passionate about, a problem that you want to solve, that you see, wow, there is an investment of time on this Python stuff that I'm going to have to put in and do the work, but I want to use it for something that I want to solve, right? So, for example, last week I was with Lily Ray, and she was trying to, hey, look, I'm trying to do this EAT analysis at scale for our clients. So there is a clear benefit of you learning these skills, because the outcome is going to benefit, it's going to help you become better in a specific task in your job. And I'm having conversations with enterprise SEOs, heads of SEOs that are doing this Python stuff, and their departments are shining because they're being seen as very innovative, because they're not being constrained by the tools and the technologies or the data that they have available through traditional means. They're able to get further from that. So it's really exciting.
that's precisely right. And to go back to your initial statement with, kind of motivation is a real fickle and fleeting thing sometimes. And it's, just going through lessons and tutorials for the sake of learning the syntax and all that is pretty dry, and you can kind of fizzle out really quickly just doing that. Just think about grabbing an algebra textbook and working through the textbook. You're not going to make it through in most parts. But if you have like a really beforehand an interesting problem to solve, or again you have a need that programming will fulfill for you, you have a project already in mind, as you're going through these lessons, as you're kind of building your repertoire within the syntax, you can start identifying opportunities on how to use those things within your project, and that just gets your motivation going. You're excited, you're building off of it. And those kind of small snowball wins, you'll end up 2 months later with something you could never have conceived of,
Yeah, exactly.
actually
Yeah.
building from
No,
the
I've been really impressed specifically with you, because I think almost every day I see an article that you're publishing on the site, or at least twice or three times a week, and I was like, wow, you're at a 5 or 10 times the pace that I'm writing. I'm writing like once a month, like once a day. So it's incredible. And for me, that's exciting, right? It's really, really exciting to see this happening in the community, right?
Yeah,
So
and
that's awesome.
it's addictive. It's it's a lot of it's creativity, it's creation. I can't paint,
Yeah.
I can't draw, but when you can translate that into a digital form with coding, it is a form of creation. It's addictive just because of the customization is at the byte level, literally. So it's
That's
fantastic, and I do have to just tell you about the pace that I've been writing at. A lot of that stuff is from tools that I built during that April and May part. So I may slow down,
oh, and
but
you're dripping them, right? So I knew
yeah,
you had a
yeah,
trick.
yeah.
That's awesome.
I have
So
plenty.
yeah, that's great. So if you want, let's start with the walkthrough of the script that you brought for us, right? And if you can, while you're showing us the script, give us a little of the background. How do you learn to piece it together? If you use what kind of online resources you use to put it together, and
Absolutely.
yeah, walk us through it, right?
Yeah.
So
Let me
you guys ready?
share my screen. Always important to get the right screen here. All right. Let me know if you can see the Google Colab.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So if for those who are viewing this for the first time, the whole point of this is to show you the process of how you could blend data from different sources together. Now, I have selected 4 different sources. They could be anything. These were just available to me. So if you have data in a Majestic or data in any number of platforms, or even data that you just put together manually, you can use this kind of framework to use those data sources as well.
Yeah,
So
and it's a common need, right? Because different industries, you might have proprietary data, you might have data in Salesforce or data in whatever you're having it. And
absolutely.
yeah, and one of the benefits, because you say, okay, you can do some of this with Tableau or Power BI, right? But one of the challenges that you face when you're trying to pull the information in these platforms, which is a little bit easier, is that the data that you have to blend is not going to be in the same format that you're expecting it, right? So the dates might be formatted differently, the URLs might be relatives. So there is a lot of nuances in when you're trying to combine data that Python allows you to overcome those limitations. It's really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, precisely. And right. I mean, you can do even data blending quite a bit in like Excel, but again, you're at the mercy of that app and what's available to that app. Python is infinitely more flexible. So I chose data from Google Search Console, Google Analytics, Ahrefs, and Screaming Frog. Now, in this case, I want to highlight that as you're exporting some of this data, especially for GSC and GA, you want to always be stitching together data that is within the same data range. Because if you don't, you're going to have data blended together that maybe doesn't make sense if you have 2 different data ranges. So make sure you're always exporting the same data range. And for GSC, we're going to take all the performance data, so impressions, CRT, positions, and clicks. Almost misclicked, clicks. For Google Analytics, we're going to look at the 90 days as well. And you also have the choice to choose how many items to export. I think that is based on what you're viewing. So you want to always select. I think 1,000 is okay. You can go even higher to the max. That's fine. For Ahrefs data, we are going to be using that for keyword data, number of keywords per URL, and that is found through Ahrefs top pages function or capability. That's found on the left sidebar if you use Ahrefs. One thing that you want to note is you want to export the full amount and to or UTF-8. That will better align with what's exported with Google Analytics and GSC. And finally, with Screaming Frog, you want to make sure that you're only exporting the HTML records. and save that. And lastly, we want to upload those 4 files to Google Colab on the left sidebar. So if you're not familiar with Google Colab, it will be on this left sidebar here with the little folder, and then to upload this icon here, and it will prompt you to upload those files. So now that we have our data, let's get started. The first thing, obviously, for your script is kind of setting up the initialization, and you want to import different libraries or modules that we want to use. Libraries or modules are Python files in themselves that are organized as a collection of functions to help you do certain processes that are kind of related together. I don't know if that makes sense. Was that a good way to describe it, Hamlet?
Yeah.
So we're going to be importing the pandas module, and this module is really well known for data science. It can store data into what you could visualize as a table or like a database form, a mini database for.
Yeah, I like to call pandas is like Excel in steroids.
Exactly. Yeah, and you'll be able to see exactly how it outputs, and it'll make sense to you. Something interesting that we're going to load as well is an extension that Google provides, Google Colab provides, called Data Table, and it basically transforms this output for that pandas usually outputs, which is kind of ugly. And maybe we can see an example of what it looks like afterwards without this, but it kind of polishes it up, and makes it more like Excel. Next, I got a little tip from the previous webinar from Elias Dabas, fantastic webinar before, and he had this really nice little snippet of script where it would print out your module version numbers. So if you had a whole lot of other imports in there, it would go through all of them and show you the version numbers, which is important too, specifically with Python, because different modules get updated. And they can break what you're doing. It's just one of those constants in development that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, Elias is on the audience. So say hi, Elias.
Yeah, shout out, big fantastic influencer as well. Check out his website and his toolkits.
Yeah, check out AdverTools.
Yeah,
use it a lot. Yeah.
And lastly, we're going to input our domain here, a URL, because we're going to use that to append to some Google Analytics, the URL column, because Google Analytics, when you export that, you'll see that the page URL column, they only use page path, right? There's no full URL in Google Analytics data. So we need to, when we match up other data, which I'll talk about in a second here, they need to match. So we need to add that domain to the URL, but more on that in a second. So we'll run this little script here, this little part, the snippet. Not a whole lot will happen other than we're going to print out the version of pandas here. So we'll do that, and there we go. And it says we're using pandas 112. I think that is the most recent. 113 may be out, but 112 is great. Next, we're going to load the first data set, which is Google Search Console. And you can see we're going to use the pandas library here, this function called read CSV. Can't be any easier. You just type in your file name here that refers to on the left side that you uploaded. That will store that data from the CSV into a pandas data frame object. And as we go through this script, I'm going to be doing a little bit of polishing that makes sense for my data sets. Obviously, you can take it as you see fit, working with your own data sets. But I do notice that in GSC, the CTR, it comes with click-through rate. It comes with the percentage symbol on there. And there may be a more elegant way to do this. Let me know, Hamlet. But I like to round CTR. Sometimes they go to the 10,000th, I don't know how you'd say that, but there's too many decimals. There's too many numbers after decimal, so I usually like to round that out, and it's difficult to do that with a string character in there. Could be a better way to do it, but this will do it for you.
Yeah, that will do it. Yeah, so Marcus is asking if the collab is going to be available. So Brittany, he's asking in the tutorial that we tweeted yesterday, it should be there, right? So if you can share that link to the Twitter thread, we already shared this code, right? In Twitter.
Yeah, it should be available.
So Brittany, if you can copy and paste that link to the tutorial, the Twitter thread link from yesterday, you should have this that Greg is sharing, is doing the walkthrough.
Will do.
Right.
Perfect. So now that we've imported our Google Search Console into a pandas data frame, we can actually, take a look at that already by using the head function for pandas. That just will show you the data frame, and it defaults showing you 5 records. So we'll click that, and we get this really nice output, which you can see kind of feels like a spreadsheet. And you can see our page data here, clicks, impressions, CTR, and position. Fantastic. Something else to mention is if you want, I often want to take a subset of the data rather than just like the top X. And the way you can do that is using the iloc or iloc, I don't know how people say that, function, and a couple brackets here, and do a little, so we can go from, like if we want the 10 to 20 records, it now shows us our 10 to 20 records. That's how you can kind of get different views. But in our case, head works just fine.
Yeah, that's great.
And again, that's top 5. If you want, say, top 25, you can just put 25 in that function, and it'll show you 25. So, a lot of different ways.
Something I also wanted to mention, sorry to interrupt, is you see where he has rocket clicks at the top? That's the power of this, right? Once you do it for one site, if you're managing multiple brands, you're managing multiple clients, you can just change that and do this. And now you don't have to do the whole work again. You do it once for one client, and then you can repeat the same analysis just by changing the domain here, right? Into your right, depending on how you do it. But that's the cool thing about this.
Absolutely, it kind of templates it out, and there's like, you can think of there being two different like levels of automation. This is a form of automation in itself. Even though we're doing some manual work for it, it's still doing automatic processes that you can repeat. And an ultimate goal, you can schedule this out. Say in some advanced time in your development, you start tapping into APIs that don't require you to upload these new files. I'm pretty sure the pro version of Colab, you can do scheduling. Is that right, Hamlet?
I think I saw that they had a survey that they were asking. I don't think that they have a feature, but I got a request.
So they're working on
about prioritization, and they were asking about scheduling. Yeah, it's one of the things that they were.
So you could have this run automatically, once a week or whatnot, and you never have to touch it.
Well, I'm giving a talk in a couple of weeks where that is, you can also from here, once you test it out, you can write a cloud function, and then you can have this code in the cloud, in Google Cloud, as a function that you can schedule to run automatically. And
like
it's really
AWS Lambda or something like that.
Similar, it's Google Cloud Functions, similar to the Lambda functions in AWS. Yeah.
It's exciting out there. Yeah, so many things. Great. So now that we have GSC, we can keep moving on here a little quickly. Next data set. So this will stay here. It's staying in the DF GSC data frame. Nothing happens with that. We just put that aside, and we move on to importing our Ahrefs data into a new data frame. So we'll have 4 different data frames to work with. And you can see for here, I have nothing after this read CSV, but I do have something after this read CSV, because putting these brackets here, you're actually selecting, what kind of columns in that data you want. Maybe you don't want all of it. You only want a certain number of columns. You don't have anything in GSC because we wanted all that data. But Ahrefs gives you a whole lot of data that we don't care about. In this instance, we just care about the keyword data, so the number of keywords for each URL. So we definitely want that column. And we also want the URL column because we're going to use the URL column to match the GSC page column. That's how we're going to merge. So maybe I should have backed up a little bit and said, most times when you're merging data, if people are used to like databases and SQL joins, you need to match against some column or some data that is similar, is the same. It's kind of like a primary key in databases for the most part, so that the data can flow from that matched column, if that makes sense. So we need to match the page. Moving on, the next step is just a little bit of polishing. I don't love ugly titles for columns. It makes selecting and using some functionality more difficult. So we're going to invoke the rename, the pandas rename function, and tell it that the column number of keywords, which matches up here, we're just going to rename it just to keywords. Just nice, simple, easy. Now,
what do you recommend? A quick question. What do you recommend? What resource for people that want to learn how to manage pandas like this? Upload and rename and all that stuff. I assume that you didn't just read the documentation. Do you recommend any specific resource to get started with it?
I actually think the official documentation is the best. I forget what the address is. We can get that at some point. But Pandas does have and I'm not even sure who develops Pandas, but there is some official documentation.
Yeah, I met the Wes McKinney, but it's an open source project with multiple maintainers and people working on it.
Yeah, it's
So I like to recommend it's called 10 Minutes to Pandas. So if you Google 10 Minutes to Pandas, it gives you kind of like, because pandas there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. You can get lost really quickly. That would be a good way to just get started and learn the fundamentals here.
Absolutely. And one of the best ways I learn is to say this collab is available to the public. You can learn a whole lot just by kind of messing around and seeing what works and what doesn't work. So take whatever in here. You don't even need to learn, what's exactly some of this stuff is happening, but change things around, add things, see what combinations actually work, and without even having to read the documentation, you can figure out what kind of works and what doesn't.
I love that, especially because yeah, so we're going to have the webinar on YouTube on Monday. You're going to have it. But basically, I love that because the approach for the marketer, right, and the engineer is completely different. The engineer is going to read all the documentation and get really familiar with it. You as a marketer, you're taking code, and that's what I'm encouraging the community, everybody sharing, because you're going to build up from the work of somebody else, right? In my articles, you're building up from the articles that I'm publishing. And at the end of the articles, a lot of my articles, I share projects from different people from the community that are opening code and they're sharing it. So just take this notebook, make a copy, and start playing with it. Make mistakes, make a copy so that you at least can revert back to a workable state. Start making mistakes, start making changes, testing ideas and changing, and see how it works. Right, that's kind of like the best way. It's just practice. It's great.
It's just tinkering, reverse engineering type of thing like that. There are many cases where I will try something out and it works, and I don't know exactly why it works. If someone asks me, what does this mean? What is this really? How does this work? And I wouldn't be able to tell you. I just know that it does work. It is working, And a lot of times, marketers are so busy that you don't need to always know the deep technical, things that you'd find on, say, like a Stack Overflow, where a computer scientist tells you at the byte level what's happening. For the most part, if it works, keep moving on, So yeah, I don't need to get too granular on this stuff. For the most part, we're just loading, again, Ahrefs data and kind of polishing the data a little bit. So let's run this one again and see what happens. So you can see we get a whole new independent data frame here with the URL and the keyword data. Let's move on to Google Analytics. Now this is a little bit different because of the way of how Google Analytics exports their data. It's actually a 3-sheeter in one Excel file. So in the way that you specify the certain sheet is this attribute right here. And that's something I had to learn by trial and error a little bit. I was like, why isn't this working? I don't get it. And then you open up the GA file, and the first sheet that comes up is like a cover sheet. And you're like, well, yeah, now I know why.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've been through that.
So by default, it's the second sheet, and they call it dataset 1. So I'm not going to mess with that. It's called dataset 1. And there's a whole lot of data in there too that, again, maybe you want it, maybe you don't. You decide. These were the elements that I thought were most useful. So we're taking the landing page, sessions, new users, and bounce rate columns from that Excel sheet. And doing, again, a little bit of polishing. This is where we use that domain variable that we set earlier. Again, because GA only tracks page paths, they don't track the whole URL. Someone, maybe Simo Ahava could tell us why, that is the way it is, but that's how they decided to track pages. So we need to append your domain so that it matches our data in Ahrefs and it matches our data in GSC for the page, for the URL columns. And I'm also going to kind of mess with the bounce rate again, try and get that to round a bit, because they give you a long decimal that doesn't help anybody other than computer scientists. So we want to just get that to, really a percentage.
Yeah, and that's what this is where you see Python is standing out from other tools, right? That you're able to reformat the data that you're trying to blend so that it matches, because you need a column or two to be able to match. And here's an example where the pages are relative. You have to make them absolute, and and there might be other things like the parameters or stuff like that, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and as whatever sources you blend and you kind of take a look at the underlying data, you'll be able to see what needs to be polished as well. And raw data is raw data. It needs to be cooked a little bit to be digestible. Stay with the analogy there. So again, we're going to update this to the GA data frame. It'll be another independent data frame, and we see the landing page again, and we see it appended. Just out of curiosity, let's not append it and see what happens. And you can see it's just the relative page path. So if we were to try and merge these two together, these two data frames, nothing would happen, because you try and match a column to a column, and well, they're never going to match. So that's why we need, at least for GA, we need to add that domain in there so they match. Okay, lastly, we're going to load in Screaming Frog. This one's pretty easy. Again, we're going to import just these 4 or 3, maybe I can read right. Yeah, these 4 columns that we like. And again, rename. For some reason, Screaming Frog has just a bizarre naming convention with some of their columns, and we just want to rename title 1 just to title. So we will do that. And we'll see this data frame. So now we have address, title, word count, and crawl depth. So at this point, we've got our 4 data frames for each data source. Something that you might be wondering is, well, the URL column that we want to match are all different, or labeled differently, or titled differently. This one's page, this one's URL, this one's landing page, this one's address. That's okay. We can handle that with the next phase here, and it's not complicated. Pandas has a function, it's called merge, and that's what it does. It merges two data frames together, and you can see these first two parameters, or whatever we'll call them. What would you call these, Hamlet? You know, these different attributes. No, what do you call those? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, these are parameters.
You're
Yeah.
on parameters. Yeah. So the first two inputs are the two, or parameters are the two data frames that you're trying to merge. So this is our GSC data frame and our Google Analytics data frames. We want to merge those together, and then we need to tell them how to merge them together. We can tell them that we want to merge them based on whatever the URL columns are. You know, for GSC, it was called page. So left on, that would be the first one. We want to merge based on the page for the GSC, and then right on, which refers to the data source on the right, is GA, and that was called landing page. So it's saying merge these two data sets based on matching URLs in the page column and the landing page column. And how you do that, you know, there's a lot of variations you can put in here. If you're familiar with database joins, again, they're very similar. I think there's left, right, inner. There could be some other ones in there too, and that's just, you can research that. It's you know, that's a whole other topic. But inner will match the data sources that have a common address.
Yeah, and you see a couple of things here is that this is why it's so important to make sure that the columns are, you know, equivalent in terms of the pages with the domains, and yeah, with a simple, you know, instruction, you can combine so the data set from completely different tools, right? Mm-hmm. So, and you can come, and that's where the creativity that you can, whatever tool you're using, doesn't matter. They're all going to output some data in one format or whatever. And you can combine everything and drive new insights that you wouldn't be able to get separately from every tool. Example, Search Console. This is one example. I mean, you know, if you know, I'm working on a few projects with Manning, and we're showing how to add revenue data to Search Console, because, you know, Search Console doesn't have revenue data. You say, look, what if you can add revenue data by doing these ideas? It's really cool, right? And I have an article on data blending on Search Engine Land that will show you the different options in terms of the how do you do the combinations, inners, left, right, you know, and it will show you the theory behind it and why you select one or the others. It's really
perfect. I love it. Yeah, and you're spot on, right? And I should have mentioned this, you know, in the beginning. You know, the real benefit of data blending is to make the insights and correlations, you know, obvious to you. If you're looking, you know, if you're switching browsers from one platform to the other, it's really difficult to see correlations and relationships. But when you can put them together in one screen right away, they just jump out at you, and you just start wondering, well, that's different, that's strange, I'm starting to see a pattern there. And, you know, you go down the rabbit hole that is usually very fruitful.
Yeah. So, Greg, we have about 10 minutes, so make sure that we cover the whole walkthrough. We're almost in the end.
We're almost there. I mean, there's just not a whole lot to it. It's very easy, right? So at this point, we've merged the two data frames together, GSC and GA, and we can take a really easy, quick look at what that looks like. And so you can see we have the page here. And clicks, and so this is GSC data, the first bunch, and then the second bunch is your GA data. So even this, from this point, just merging these two, I bet you can find all kinds of interesting things. You can make, you know, your correlations and graphs. And
exactly, you have positions, you have click-through rate, right, and you have bounce rate in the same data set. How cool is that, right? Pretty interesting.
And, you know, obviously you can see a duplication between page and landing. Mm-hmm. And that's just a matter of
doesn't matter because it's the same, right?
Yeah, so, and there are ways, you know, you can filter that out, and you can take out landing or whatever, and we'll actually do that later on for our final, selecting just what we want. But in the most part, by default, they throw everything together. So let's just continue with this and move on to adding Screaming Frog. So what we'll do is we'll take the combination now of GA and GSC and merge it with the Screaming Frog data frame. And with the same convention, merge on page and address and inner, and we'll see what that looks like. And it starts to look a little bit, by default, a little bit packed, and you can present this in a lot of different ways. We will once we finalize our view, but you can see that we have our Screaming Frog data in there now with address, title, word count, crawl depth, and again, the correlations you can already make with this data is powerful. I'll show you something, how you can easily graph some correlations.
That's nice.
So let's, actually, I was wrong. No, that was right. Yeah, Screaming Frog. Then the last part of the piece for this is Ahrefs data, some keyword data. So same convention. We'll take that combination GSC, GA, Screaming Frog data frame and merge it with, lastly, the Ahrefs data frame. Same convention based on page and URL columns, and we'll see what that looks like. And so we have here GSC, GA, address, Screaming Frog, and I think actually, yep, it was off the page. And so on the right here, now we have our data for keywords. How many? This number is how many keywords a certain URL is ranking for according to Ahrefs.
Wow. So you have the crawl depth. This is so awesome, right? You have pretty much anything. Now imagine you have that information, all the new insights that you can derive from that, right? Looking at what, the depth of the crawl, if that has an impact on the number of keywords the page ranks for. It's amazing. It's just your creativity is the limit.
The possibilities are endless with, look at this. There's really, taking out some of the polishing. It's literally what, 15 lines? That's nothing, right? That's not intimidating. That's not, a collection of 10 files of hundreds of lines and complex functions. Python is so great because it's just so concise.
That's awesome. Let's see the visualization. You have some visualizations?
Yeah. So kind of lastly, I'll go real quick here. Just kind of some opportunities now. Now that we have everything in one data frame, we can kind of clean it up, and I can show you ways to filter maybe and form it that it's useful to you. One way you can do that is through kind of this filtering, making a subset here. You can say that maybe we want only certain URLs or something in a certain URL. Like this works really great for sites that are very highly structured. So I know I'm using RocketClicks data, and they have a really nice blog structure. And so we are, I'm going to say, whatever's in page better contain, I only want to see data where it contains the word education. And it'll show us all the URLs that are in our education blog. And you can also add on to that saying, also, I only want to see where word counts are higher than 1,000. So you can start to filter out the data that you kind of care about. You can do sorting as well. I'm going to sort by clicks, but you can sort by impressions. Any column that's actually any column. I think if it's alphabetical, or if it's a string, it'll do it by alphabetical. Correct me if I'm wrong. But numerical will go, ascending or descending. You can set that.
Yeah, the idea here is that this is why it's important to make sure that you have the right data types in the data frame. If you open another cell in the 27, you do df final.info, you can see, let's do that. Open another in the one before, right after the 27. So you can create another cell. Just insert another cell.
Oh, I'm sorry. What are you giving me direction?
Yeah. So if you can create another in just create another cell and type df-_final.info.
What was it?
.info. Info.
And then that?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah. So here you see the data types of every column. So when you're doing sorting, right, if it's a string and if it's a number, the sorting is going to be different, right? So that's where you if you want the sorting to be interpreted as number, you want to make sure that you're using an integer or a float, right? You see that?
Exactly. Yep.
Because it's going to affect, you know, how it's being sorted. Yeah, that's it. I wanted to show you that. So let's see how. Yeah, exactly. So let's see the graphing that you have. We have a few more
Yeah,
minutes.
real quick. I'll just show you what, when you're doing all this kind of cleanup, what you can come up with now is a really nice compact view with all the garbage thrown out of it, and you can see this is just amazing. All your data in here, and correlations are endless. But like you're saying, you can visualize this with a graph. So Pandas has a nice graph feature. But here I'm gonna sum the impressions over crawl depth and just see what that kind of looks like. And you know, I'm not saying this is useful. You can pick what columns you want to use, but this is telling us that, you know, at a crawl depth of 3, we get most of our impressions. I think that's interesting for some SERP analysis and stuff like that.
Yeah, it would probably be also useful to have like the average number of URLs, because it might be that is showing a lot because of a lot of pages are in that group.
Exactly. Yep. There's
can
infinite analysis on this, and I'll be the first to admit this is one of the things that I'm trying to work on the most is graphing and visualization with that module of math plot lib or whatever. It's a whole new beast, but for the most part, you can just mess with this, and you can use different functions here. You know, you can do counts or anything like that, and mess with different types of graphs too. This is obviously, we're saying it's a bar graph. There's all kinds of different graphs you can use. And so, and super finally, say that, okay, so we've got this great information in a data frame. Say you do want to throw it back to Excel, and you know how to use that better, and you want to use a pivot table or something or whatnot, which you can make in Pandas as well, or Python. But you can simply use this Pandas function called to CSV, and you name it, and you run it, and let's refresh here, and boom. You just throw that in Excel, and you
download it. That's so beautiful, right? You don't have to set up Linux environments and anything. So Greg, so let's spend a couple of minutes that we have left to answer a couple of questions that we have.
Yeah.
From the audience. Not sure if you wanted to share anything else on the. But this is amazing. Thank you very much. This is just great. And it's so simple and accessible that you're showing it. I think, you know, it's been, if everybody agrees, it's really valuable. So this code, you know, it's in our Twitter handle. It's the last tutorial that do it every Thursday. We publish it. This was just a walkthrough to gain to the insights of how to Greg put it together. So really excited about it. Greg, there was some questions. So there was Michael Cortez that he was trying to load, he exported href data, and he's getting an error about Unicode decode error. It's saying UTF product can decode by position. So for me, that sounds like maybe you didn't export it in UTF. So I think that hrefs has 2 options when you're exporting, right?
Yep.
You have to be explicit about exporting in UTF. UTF is how the text is encoded directly. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So and if that does some work, you know, let us know in Twitter, and we'll be happy to debug it for you.
Any questions you guys have going forward, let me know. Definitely reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help. But yeah, UTF-8, because if you export to UTF-16, the other data is going to be UTF-8. So those things have to match to merge correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, where can I follow you? Do you want to share your site and your Twitter handle and everything, your LinkedIn, so people know how to reach out to you, right? I have to do that more often, so people start spreading the questions that I get over Twitter and start getting more questions to Charlie, you know, Elias, you and Brittany. Everybody starts sharing the questions. Everybody.
That's the wrong account. I don't know if you can still see my.
Wow, you have like 100 notifications on Twitter. It looks like they're excited with all the stuff you're sharing.
So my Twitter is. Can you see my Twitter right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is me, Greg Bernhardt 4. I'm so sad. I got late to
Oh,
the.
but you're following. It's good that you're following yourself. So that you're.
Yeah. Well, I'm logged into my Physics Forums Twitter account. So,
Oh, okay, okay, that's the trick, right? So I have a couple of other questions. You know, we're past the time. If you guys have to leave, we understand. It's
yeah.
been a couple of questions to answer. So Alex Paul says, I think Google has quite a new service that enables a Chrome-like scheduling. Are you using it in terms of file upload to drive lazy? I haven't heard about that service. I know that they have Cloud Scheduler. Maybe that's what you're referring to. It works really well with Cloud Functions and pops up. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, right? And he is also asking how, if you are trying to export, this is a great question, the notebooks into scripts to run in a server, right? I'm not sure what's better, figure out automating collabs or running on a cheap DigitalOcean server, right? I mean, sure, Colab is free, right? You know, so DigitalOcean, even if it's $5, you have to pay for it. So yeah, so you probably, Colab is great for prototyping, and it has an option when you download, you can download the Jupyter Notebook file of the Colab. You can also download a Python script. Then you can edit that Python script in your, you know, I'll use Xcode, you know, from Microsoft Visual Code, and then you can remove, you can, you know, add additional options so that it runs effectively as a script. So that's, I don't know, Greg, if you have any input on that.
I'll just add that you don't need a web server, so to speak, or a third-party web server or cloud server, anything like that. I run half of my things locally off just a Linux operating system. You can connect to web services just fine that way. So, you know, if you want a free option that you already have your laptop, just run it off your laptop.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So I have another question from Jan Raniecki. So I don't know if you pronounce your last name correctly. So he says slightly off topic. It's not off topic because he's talking about, you know, about merging data from Google Ads. He says, you know, what if we can, on top of that, pull data from AdWords and have a full view of incoming search data? That's amazing. That's great, and it's a great use case. Because a lot of times with SEO, we just do siloed and looking at just, you know, SEO and all the tools in SEO. That's great because it's the same SERP, right? So merging paid search data is a great use case of this. So you can export it manually, you can use APIs. The only nuance on paid search is that there are differences in what they call a URL. So there is the display URL that is only for displaying purposes, but not necessarily it's a real URL. And there is the landing page URL. And in the landing page, there's more nuance because sometimes it uses redirection. So you have to make sure that you're really using a page that is a landing page. And also, if you're using page search data, it's very likely that it's going to have a bunch of redundant parameters to track campaigns and keys and stuff like that. So you have to use in Python, you have to strip those parameters to match them up with the organic pages, assuming that the site is sending paid traffic to the same pages as they're ranking organically. Because sometimes they create just special landing pages just for paid search that are not meant to be ranking organically. But those are kind of like the nuances that you have to think about. But yeah, blending paid data is a great use of this technique.
Yeah, right? Great idea and great advice, Hamlet. Absolutely.
So yeah, so I think we answered questions, and wow, I have more. That's it. Yeah. So he's talking about using Raspberry.
Raspberry Pi, is that what we're talking about?
What is Raspberry Pi? Is that what you're talking? I don't know what Raspberry is.
I hope so, because part of my quarantine projects was with Raspberry Pi.
Oh, Raspberry Pis, yeah.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, you can export, you know, download your Python scripts and then, you know, transfer them to the Raspberry Pi. I remember I went to a PyCon probably 5 years ago, and they were giving them away. So we were actually playing with them directly in the class. So
I'll just say though, even I had a Raspberry Pi 4 that I burned out, but they're not super powerful. So if you are really doing some serious crunching, it may not be best at, but to play around with and have,
That's awesome.
fun with, absolutely a great educational tool.
So yeah, so thanks everybody for joining, and I hope you guys get encouraged with this. And Brittany, let's share the form where we're getting, in our call out for more guests. So we have guests now up to February. So make sure that you get your slot early now, because it's getting exciting. And you see, it's not about, writing really complicated and expert level type of, content. I want this to be a community effort where you're seeing, oh, look, I learned Python a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I'm able to do this, right? It's valuable information, because, showing something that Hamlet can do is 20, 30 years of experience. It's not going to put you in a position that is, so this is why I want to see that the community, somebody that learned it this year, just a few months ago, is putting great information and value. And I think you all agree that this is it, right? Because we can bring value that developers, they don't have this context about all these different tools and all this information. And we can come up with it ourselves because we have the domain knowledge to do it. And that's what I want to see. And it's not, don't feel intimidated. And as you're sharing with others, you learn. That's another way to learn, by sharing. You're learning by sharing, and you're getting feedback, in a sense. So it's really, really exciting. And we're building an amazing community around this. We're, everybody's excited about it, right? So, so we're gonna share that form, Brittany, if you have it, so submit to be a guest on these webinars and tutorials. Okay. So thank you, Ray. Thanks again, Greg. I really appreciate the work. This is awesome. Yeah. So we'll stay connected, and keep pushing it hard. You understand, you're rising in the space and getting everybody to notice. So that's great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me in this webinar. I had a great time, and I'll just last say, if everyone's interested, reach out within the Twitter Python SEO community. It's actually really strong. There's some amazing people out there that I want to name drop, but I would mess up their names for sure, and that's my fault. But it's very strong. So check out Hamlet and I and others, and feel free to reach out. We're in this together.
Exactly. Have a great one.
Thank you so much.
Bye.